Okay, let's dive right into this. We all go through the education system, but how often do we actually stop and ask a really basic question? What is it all for? Like, what's its real purpose? Because according to the source we're looking at today, there might be a huge, fatal flaw baked into the very foundation of modern education. The source we're exploring uses this incredible metaphor. It calls the system a giant road roller, and it's a powerful image, right? It's huge, it's heavy, it has this unstoppable momentum. You can't just stand in front of it and tell it to stop. It's just too big. So that raises a pretty important question. If we can't stop this thing, can we at least figure out where it's going and why? And maybe, just maybe, if we understand it, we can learn how to steer it a little. To do that, we first have to look at what it's built on. And this brings us right to the heart of the argument. The source claims that to really get a handle on the system's big flaw, we need to understand a fundamental concept about knowledge itself, a concept that, frankly, the modern world has pretty much forgotten. That concept is called Vidya, and it literally translates to the two kinds of knowledge. The core idea here is that for a complete, well-rounded human life, you can't just have one type of knowledge. You absolutely need two. So let's break that down. On one side, you've got Para Vidya. Think of this as worldly knowledge. It's all the how-to stuff, how to build an engine, how to write code, how to do surgery. It's everything you need for material life. But then, on the other side, you have Para Vidya. This is the higher knowledge. This is the big why. Why am I here? What's my purpose? What makes a life meaningful? And here is the absolute kicker. The source argues that our entire modern education system is built almost exclusively on Apara Vidya, the worldly how, while completely, totally ignoring Para Vidya, the higher why. And this isn't just a minor issue. It's described as a fatal flaw. Think about it like an electrical circuit. You need two terminals, right? A positive and a negative. That's how it works. If you only have one, the circuit is dead on arrival. It's not just weak, it's fundamentally broken. And the source says there's no recovery from this because the system doesn't even realize the other half is missing. All right, so let's see how this one fatal flaw isn't just some abstract idea. It actually creates this huge ripple effect that completely changes the student, the teacher, and even the society that they're a part of. So let's start with the person at the very center of all this, the student. How does this massive philosophical shift change the way we actually view the person who is supposed to be learning? In the ancient Indian tradition, there was this fascinating concept called Adhikaritva, and the idea was that every single student has their own unique, natural aptitude, a specific talent or inclination. So the goal wasn't to shove everyone down the same pipeline, but to figure out what each person was naturally suited for. And this led to two completely different approaches. The ancient system was all about customized, tailor-made education that actually fit the student. And the cream of the crop, the best and brightest, were often encouraged to pursue that higher knowledge, the Para Vidya. Now contrast that with the modern system. It's mostly a one-size-fits-all assembly line model. And it's cream of the crop. They get funneled almost exclusively towards material, worldly success. Okay, so if the student's role gets turned on its head, what do you think happens to the teacher? Well, as you might guess, the guide on this whole educational journey is also completely transformed. The ideal teacher was called an Acharya. Now, this was so much more than a job title. An Acharya wasn't just someone who could dump information into your head. They were a living, breathing embodiment of the values they taught. They didn't just talk about being noble, they were noble. They walked the walk. And the shift to today is, well, it's dramatic. The teacher was once this moral compass, a true role model. But today, the source argues, they're often just cogs in the giant wheel of an education business. And they're judged not so much on their character, but on things like how much research funding they can bring in or how many papers they publish. So we've covered the student and the teacher, but education doesn't happen in a bubble, right? So what happens to the entire culture when its philosophy of education changes this much? Well, the ancient system had this brilliant one-two punch. First, you had your formal schooling, the Gurukula. But, and this is so important, you also had informal education happening everywhere. In the family, through the arts, at festivals, in the stories everyone told. All of it worked together to reinforce the same core societal values, the concept of Dharma, or living a righteous life. And you can see the difference so clearly here. In the ancient system, the whole of society was a support network for what you learned in school. Social control came from the inside,
from something called lokapavada, basically the fear of public shame. But today, society often pushes back against higher values, bombarding us with messages of materialism. And control has shifted from an internal moral compass to an external fear of getting caught by the police or the law, which, let's be honest, can sometimes be manipulated.
So, after all is said and done, this all boils down to one massive question. What's the end game here? What are the ultimate goals that these two very different systems are trying to achieve? For the individual, the ancient goal was to create an integrated person, someone whose head, heart, and hands were all aligned with a higher purpose. The modern goal? Well, it's mostly about getting a good job and achieving material success. And for society, the ancient goal was to create a stable, healthy community, a swasta samaj. The modern system, because it's so focused on the material how, naturally creates a consumer society where materialism is king. And to wrap this all up, the source leaves us with one final really haunting image. It admits, look, the modern system is amazing in some ways. It has incredible variety and mobility. You can study literally anything and go anywhere. But all of that complexity is missing one vital component. And there it is, a headless monster. Think about that. All the parts of the body are there, the arms, the legs, the organs. They're all working, moving, specializing. But there is no head to give it direction, to give it purpose, to give it meaning. That head, the source argues, was always meant to be Para Vidya, that higher knowledge of why. And this leaves us with a really provocative final question to chew on. If we accept this idea, even just a little bit, if our education system really is this incredibly powerful, aimless, headless monster, then the real challenge for us becomes, what kind of head should we give it?